Morning.
Good morning, American. How you doing?
Okay, man. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
No problem, no problem. Okay, we're about to get started and go live in just a moment. We're live now. Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to Wave FM. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I know it is early. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning, though, for this is an important conversation that we're about to have this morning. This will be a virtual town hall discussion. I want to first of all thank the Louisville Mayor Greg Fischer for being with us this morning, and also I want to thank you, Mayor, for being as transparent with us as you have been over the following weeks as we've dealt with the pandemic, as we've dealt with the death of Breonna Taylor, and especially questions surrounding the LMPD. But thank you for just offering yourself and the mayor's office and just being very informative with Wave FM. We want to thank you for that, first of all, Mayor. Also, I want to thank our guest panelists for this morning, whom we here at Wave FM feel are powerful and trusted voices in the African American community here in Louisville. So with that being said, I want to introduce our guest panelists for this morning. First, we have Brad Harrison, who graduated with a degree in journalism. He is also the owner and writer of Urban Max magazine. And you can also catch Brad every Saturday on Urban Voices radio show, where he is an on-air personality and contributor. Good morning, Brad. How you doing? Okay, also we have Hannah Drake, who is an activist, poet, and blogger. She attended and studied communication at University of Colorado Boulder. Her poems and tweets have gotten national attention by such people as Colin Kaepernick and even former First Lady Michelle Obama. And you can find Hannah's content on her website at www.writesomeshit.com. Follow her on Twitter at her handle at Hannah Drake 628. I love that .com too, Hannah. Love it.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you.
morning, Hannah.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Okay, Ja'Cory Arthur is a professor at Simmons College. He is also a poet, activist, and a hip hop artist, and goes by the stage name 1200. And he got bars too, y'all. He got bars. Ja'Cory is also a Metro Council candidate for District 4 in the upcoming primary elections on June 23rd. Please vote for Ja'Cory Arthur. And that is an endorsement from Wave FM. All right, Ja'Cory. That is an endorsement. Okay. Also, we have Denisha Rivers, aka Renee Unique. She is a community activist with Vision of Life Outreach Ministries. She is also a member of the NAACP and a member of Unity in the Community. Welcome, Renee. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Ricky L. Jones, who studied political philosophy at the University of Kentucky and also attended Morehouse College and the United States Naval Academy. Dr. Ricky Jones is the chair of the Pan-African Studies Department at U of L. He is also an opinion columnist at the Curry Journal and host of his own radio show, The Ricky Jones Show, at iHeartMedia. And Dr. Ricky also has won a lot of awards for his work. Good morning, Dr. Ricky.
Good morning, brother. You lucky I'm up with you this early.
Thank you. I know, right? But you, of course, you're only doing it so I can continue to say publicly, you never tell me no to anything, right?
Exactly. So I should sign
Exactly.
off after like 5 minutes. Say I was here.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you all for joining us. And at this time, so that we stay on time, I would like to open the floor up and let Mayor Greg Fischer have opening remarks and comments. And then after that, we will start our first round of questions. So Mayor Fischer, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Antonio. Appreciate you having me on. Appreciate all of our panelists here, who I know most everybody on the panel right now. And it's just really important that we have dialogues like this, because this is just like seems like some out of whack, crazy time in America right now, between yesterday, up in Central Park, and George Floyd up in Minneapolis. And, I suppose the reality for many folks, especially African Americans, is this stuff has been going on for a long time. And now people are just starting to see it. And then, of course, we've got the Breonna Taylor tragedy in Louisville as well, which I know we're going to focus on for the most part here. So, I look at a community that's like a family. You have low lows together, you have high highs together, but at the end of the day, you're still a family and you got to work through it. I think that's the same thing for a city. So the question is, how do you work through it then as a city to get to a better end out of a tragic situation wrapped up into historical injustice for 400 years in terms of the relationship between Black Americans and the law enforcement agency. And that this is so much of what we're seeing right now that you just have to ask the question is, when is this going to change and how is this going to change? And how can you take a tragedy like what we have in our city and something good come out of that? And that's what my focus is on. So one, it's acknowledging the loss of a life of a fellow Louisvillian, a daughter, as a father of 4 adult children, you just shudder to think about if that was your child and she was gone, just the gut wrench that comes to you. So there's that kind of human instinct that you have. And then you have to put yourself in my position in the job that I have and say, okay, what can I do about it? So, number one is, how do we, to the very best possible extent we get, have truth and facts come out of this thing so justice can be served. And that's why I asked the FBI and the U.S. Attorney and the Attorney General to get involved. We turned over the case to them last week as promised. And then what can be changed immediately, and that's why we made changes to the no-knock warrant policy, the body camera policy. We'll be announcing today the members of our Civilian Review Board for stronger police oversight, so people can see that's in place. Chief Conrad is retiring, so there'll be change of leadership at LMPD. And then last week, because the defense attorney or the attorney for Mr. Walker, Kenneth Walker, put some information in the public domain, Commonwealth Attorney Tom Wine was able to address that and then dismiss the charges against Kenneth Walker. So there's been a lot that has been taking place in a relatively short period of time, but it's not over, right? Some people think, oh, they just want this to go underneath the rug and time will pass. And that's not how you how you address issues like this when more can be done to make us a safer community and a better community for everybody. And then ultimately what you're trying to get to is something that might feel very far away right now, but what we've got to get to is a police community relationship where it's seen as legitimate and trustful. And then we've got to do the hard work to get it there. And that gets back to the family analogy that, okay, we're a family, so we got to work together to get to that goal.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for those opening comments. Thank you so much. Also, I want to recognize on our panel also we have Latasha Harrison. She is the operator of the nonprofit PTO, and she is also a part of our Wave FM team over here at Wave FM. Good morning, Latasha. Thank you. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to open it up for the first round of questions. So I would like to start off with Dr. Ricky Jones.
I don't know if I have a question right now. I do certainly have a comment, and I think the mayor is absolutely right when he says these are not strange times. Unfortunately, these are very normal times for Black people that have been going on for a very long time across the country. And what we're seeing too is another manifestation, and it's something that I'm always fighting, is another manifestation of white supremacy. And when I say it's a manifestation of white supremacy, I'm saying that we have built a system in this country where at almost every level, white people are the ones who feel they have the right to think, decide, and know. And there's no way that groups such as African Americans can have trust in a system where they rarely, if ever, are in decision-making positions when things happen, when atrocities like this happen that affect their people. But not just atrocities like this, quite frankly. We're really talking about the way the system is constructed from the cradle to the grave. It's hard to have faith in an educational system where you very rarely see Black decision makers in position who are responsible for the education of our children. So they come through with a very skewed approach to the world. And so when you have systems of domination, ideology of domination, where certain groups are not seen as people who are indeed full citizens or full humans, you have situations like this. And quite often, decisions are not made with those people's humanity in place. And so you lose faith. My question is, are we now really coming to a tipping point as we see more and more videos I mean, video, optical evidence of people being mistreated and demonized and even killed. You know, how far does it go when people continue to justify it? Because remember, you know, we've seen situations like Eric Garner killed on camera. We've seen situations of Black children like Tamir Rice in Cleveland killed on camera. Still, no justice has been brought to them or their families. So, you know, the question now is, are we getting to a place where finally Black people are going to be believed, one, and two, the systems are going to appropriately respond? So we see what happened in Minneapolis yesterday with their mayor literally in tears and speaking of how being Black shouldn't be a death sentence, and them moving very, very quickly to fire the officers involved. And just because you get rid of some officers doesn't mean you should get rid of them all. And I want to say that as I conclude, I think we all would rather live in a world with police than without them. And usually police get it right. But just because they usually get it right doesn't mean that something shouldn't be done and they shouldn't admit it when they get it wrong. And in some ways, police are easy targets because in their cases, we lose lives. But we've seen Black people socially, professionally, psychologically, and physically lynched all over this country for a very, very long time. And all we can really do is start in the localities where we are and speak to that and try to end that as swiftly and as humanely as we can. And a message to Black people: the reason that things move forward is when communities themselves organically stand up and push back against existing systems, because there is no historical evidence that anything happens if they do not. And so that's something that folk across lines of race have to do in concert, you know, with loyal and decent and true white partners. And if we can do that, I think, you know, we'll be okay. But we haven't done it to date. I don't know if it's going to happen moving forward. Hopefully it will. So that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Ricky. Thank you. I'd like to move on to Mrs. Hannah Drake.
I don't know if I have a question similar to Dr. Jones, but certainly comments. All I can do is truly echo what he has said, to watch the video in Minnesota, to watch what happened in Ferguson, to watch what happened here. I think these things don't just happen in an instant. This was a buildup of Amy Klobuchar not prosecuting the police when there was an incident with Black people. You know, what happened in Ferguson didn't just happen with Mike Brown on that day. This was a buildup of oppression and a buildup of the police constantly harassing people in that town. And so I think it's the same. You know, Louisville is not immune to what's happening around the world. And so here we are today. I think how Dr. Jones emphasized, I believe that it is time for Black people and white accomplices, not necessarily allies, but an accomplice, to stand together with Black people. I was quite disappointed. Yesterday, I went down to the protest at the mayor's office, and I can count on one hand the white people that I saw standing with Black people. This does not get fixed simply by Black people doing all the protesting, all of the fighting. It is one thing to share a blog and to share a tweet, but then what? Then what will you do? Because white people are in the systems. And so even like with the police chief retiring, you know, the problem doesn't leave once he's gone. Right? This is a system within the police department that has been perpetuated by poor leadership, right? You don't just go out as a police officer and act rogue. You don't go out as a police officer and put your knee on the neck of a Black man for 10 minutes, because that's not the environment that has been perpetuated in this system, which is why officers could stand by and watch this happen. They weren't shocked at that. It was just caught on camera, right? It's the same thing here in Louisville. That's what needs to be fixed, because removing or resigning or whatever you want to call it, Conrad does nothing when you still have seeds of racism within the department. So you replace the head and the same thing is still going to happen. So I think it needs to be a complete overhaul of the police department and policies and procedures and people that are in positions of power in Louisville. And to speak to Dr. Jones's point, when Black people such as myself, such as Dr. Jones, such as you, such as people on this panel, we can't be vilified for trying to sound the alarm. We are just speaking the truth. And if people would have listened to us years ago, there may not have been a Breonna Taylor situation today. So do not vilify us for speaking the truth. Do not vilify us for trying to change policies about knocking on people's door, coming into their homes, killing them, and then being upset because they shot back at you. If you bust in my home, I'm going to shoot back at you. Don't vilify us for speaking the truth. It is simply the truth.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah.
Welcome.
Next, Jacory. Jacory, if you don't mind jumping in.
Pete, so I do have a question, and before I ask this question, I'd like to put it into historical context based on where we live at in Louisville, Kentucky. So as our city was kind of founded and came into fruition in 1776, we didn't see a formal police department until the 1820s, and that formal police department was really created with Klansmen. It was created with racists. It was created to maintain and regulate the slave population. So when you fast forward 100 years from there, you have the 1920s, and we have our first Black police officers. The first one was a Black woman, and the first Black man was William Woods, and he was killed in the line of duty by a white person, a white drug addict, for mistaken identity. Fast forward 100 years after that, we have another case of mistaken identity where Breonna Taylor is shot and killed in her own home. So my question is, Mayor Fischer, what is your administration doing to systematically change what has been going on for centuries in this city? And then to follow up with that question, why has it taken centuries for those changes to take place?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jacory. I mean, the historical context around all this is undeniable when you look at America, and whether it be on local media or national media that I've been talking about this case on, I talk about that as a white mayor because, frankly, and I think Hannah mentioned this as well, and Ricky, it's just, look, most of white America is asleep on these issues. And you have to ask, why are they asleep on this issue? Is because our history, when I say our history, the history of all America is just not taught in our grade schools. I mean, the Germans start teaching about the Holocaust in elementary school so that their children understand that the evils of Nazism will never be permitted again. Well, why don't we tell the true story of slavery and the shackling and the abuse and the theft and the raping and all of this that took place of enslaved Americans? And I would hope that Americans would say, my God, what did we do? And how are we atoning for that? And how do we have systemic overhaul? And how do we expect to have any different outcomes if we don't have different systems? And so if your power structure is entrenched in a mindset of a patriarchal older white guys, I apologize on behalf of all older white guys, I'm one of them, you're going to continue to get those type of outcomes. So how do you start with that reform at the federal level? How does it come down to the state level and down to the system level? I can tell you, I mean, there is no overt intentional policies within LMPD or your city government that is saying, okay, that says we're racist, we know we're racist, we're going to continue to perpetuate racist inequality. That's not there. Okay, what's there psychologically? What's unpacked at the moment of terror or when bullets are flying? That's a result of people's whole lifetimes coming forward. That's a result of different training, et cetera. And it gets very difficult in those areas. So, I can give you the cold answer to what you're talking about, Jacory. It's like, look, go to our training academy. Major Paul Humphreys runs all that. All the issues that we're talking about here are addressed in our training academy. So from de-escalation all the way through. But then what happens in reality when you're under very intense situations oftentimes does not meet the ideal we all have of what should happen. No excuse. That's just the reality of what takes place in the world that we live in. So the question is, how do we pick up and move forward with that? So I would encourage, and the community has been very involved in improving our training protocol within LMPD. That's one thing. Number two, how do you have a police department that looks more like the community? Okay. We're in Louisville, we're about 23% African American makeup. Our police department's around 12 or 13%. So we say, well, recruit more in Black Louisville. So we do. Okay, well, not a lot of African American citizens are saying, you know, I want to be a police officer. So that's difficult for us as well. And you have to ask, why do they not want to be police officers? And you got to unpack that as well. So I just think the more, the more we communicate on this issues, like we have been proactively with Lean Into Louisville and we have with the Synergy Project, the more we have these conversations and not just us. Look, I'm like the only white guy in this conversation, right? I hope some white people are watching this show right now, Antonio. I don't know how many, what your audience looks like, but this is a discussion for all of Louisville and all of America, where people would finally start saying, whether it's George Floyd, whether it's Michael Brown, whether it's the guy in Central Park or our Breonna, that white America would say, I got to rethink this thing. I didn't realize this, if you want to give people benefit of the doubt, but this needs to change.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Denisha?
Yeah, so Mayor, you are talking about the Synergy project that actually started in June of 2019. You and Chief Conrad and I believe Kelly started the program. The program was to connect the community and police officers and engage in a positive manner but in all aspects and reality of this. It took for a lynching of a young lady, Breonna Taylor, for Steve Conrad to resign. It's like the Louisville basketball team. Someone has to be accountable. The coach knew. Someone had to be accountable. You are the mayor. Under Steve Conrad, there was scandals after scandals. There's many civil rights lawsuits. So it took a lynching of this young lady in her own home for him to resign. So it is about leadership. There has to be a change of leadership. The community, they just don't trust the police department and they don't trust the government because of all the failures in the past for many, many years. And, the people, especially Black people, we vote you guys in. We vote politicians in. And we expect for you guys to do your job and do what you say they're going to do. But somehow the system has failed us for many years. We're just going to put a Band-Aid on it. And we're just going to be quiet. And we're going to sweep all the problems under the rug. And that's the issue. That's the concern. So moving forward, because you are getting ready to come out of office, for the next mayor that is coming in, what advice do you give them about this energy project? Because you have a lot of members in this energy project with powerful names. You have Jessica Green, you have Daryl Young and Muhammad Ali Singh, you have Black Lives Matter, and that's just to name a few that are part of this energy project. So what are these leaders going to do? What are you going to do to take the community forward, to have this police department that has been crooked and doing things for many, many, many years and getting away with it? I mean, this has to stop. These police officers need to be fired. They just need to be fired and be prosecuted, because we are human beings. We work every day. We take care of our children. We want the best for our community. And just because you have a badge does not give you a right to come in my home and shoot and kill me like a dog. So yes, we are upset because we place people in leadership. We trust you to do what you say you're going to do. So at the end of the day, our lives are not a game. They're not for stock. And the reason why I'm glad to be a part of this panel is because we don't have a political or financial gain from this. You know, this comes from life experiences. And so my question is to you is, how are we going to take this synergy project forward in the community?
Good. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it's, you know, as much as I can as an older white guy, I mean, I get the frustration and the anxiety and the disgust that I hear locally and around the country. So, you know, for better or worse, I'm the mayor right now. You know, so what my job is, how do you make the best out of a tragedy and move forward as a community and as a country as well. So as you talked about the Synergy project, and I mean, it's one of the things, you know, if I can share a frustration too, it's like when people say, what are we going to do? So I said, well, let's talk about what we have been doing, because there's not a lot of cities like ours, and we're all proud Louisvillians that have been proactively leaning into these issues around discrimination and racism. So, you know, that started with Lean Into Louisville. Now, I'm not asking for credit for this. I'm just asking for context that here's a city that proactively has been leaning into the issues around racism and discrimination. Then we launched the Synergy Project a year ago. There was no crisis when we did that. But I said, we need to work on police community legitimacy. And so we worked with Chandra Urban. I know many of you all know Chandra. Nat Urban and she are a great Louisville couple. She facilitated the process in Charleston, South Carolina, after the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church. So I said, that's the national best practice. Let's do that here in Louisville, because we want better police community legitimacy. So we've already, you know, started that about a year ago. What happens in most cities when you come out of a tragedy like this with Breonna is they announce these kind of things. We're going to announce a commission on racism. We're going to announce a commission on police community legitimacy. If there's anything we should at least feel halfway good about as a city, is we've been trying to work on these things, right? So then the question is, how can we do better? Because what we're doing so far isn't good enough. And then that's where it gets hard, like, because there is the understandable, justifiable emotion around this moment with Breonna. The question is, how do we then take that and make sure that same emotion is as intense a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, and we're applying that emotion toward police community legitimacy. We're holding our community accountable. We're holding me accountable, everybody else. And it's like that family analogy that I said, you know, you can't leave your family. It's part of your DNA. So it's like, all right, we got to go to work to try to repair this right now. So my advice for a next mayor would be, you know, you cannot deny historical racism. Okay, so I've been saying that for 9 years. There's not a lot of people that are having these conversations in this country right now. I've been leaning into it for a long time. One of my main goals was to revitalize West Louisville. So we have unprecedented investment there. That stuff just doesn't happen. My office and I have been fighting for that from day one. We're going to fight for it from the very end. So if anything, I guess you say, you've got to say, okay, who's with us? Hannah called either allies or accomplices. You know, I would hope that I'm both. And it's hard work, you know, so we cannot vilify truth tellers, whether they're a mayor or whether they're a poet. We've got to say that person's got something to say, and they need to be respected and listened to, and not just listened to, but then what are we going to do about it together? And I wish there was a light switch, but this is 400 years. So we just got to do our part while we got our spots in the community right now and look ourselves in the mirror and say, I gave it my all. And that's what I'm doing.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Greg, Mayor Greg Fischer as well. Thank you so much for those comments. If you are just now joining us, we are having a virtual town hall meeting discussing the Breonna Taylor case that is happening in Louisville, Kentucky. We are joined by Louisville Mayor Greg Fischer, and this is our panelist. Right now, we have a question and comment from, I believe, Brad Harrison. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. How you doing? How you doing, Mr. Fisher?
Hello, Brad. Good to see you.
Hey, how you doing? First, I want to thank everyone for being on the panel, especially you, Mr. Fisher. I appreciate that you are one of the people in our community that will actually listen. But with that being said, I just heard you speak about systemic and historic racism, and part of mending that, a part of fixing that is trust. And there doesn't feel like there's any trust around this Breonna Taylor situation. And why I say that is the police department and the city always ask the African American community to help them when there's crime in our community, when there's wrongdoing in our community. The criticism we always hear is that the African American community has a no snitch policy, or they don't want to assist law enforcement, therefore crime is able to manifest. Well, it feels like that's what's happening in this situation. We have a situation where a young lady was murdered back on March 13th. Maybe 5 days ago, this case was handed over to the FBI for an investigation. When this case was initially presented to the media, there was a spin on it as if the general public thought maybe that her boyfriend, Mr. Walker, may have killed this young lady. Look, we all know that the police department has a communications department. They have a PR department. There was a reason that this was spun in the media in that particular fashion. The Black community doesn't feel any trust when it comes to the city or for law enforcement. And this seems like one of those cases that if it wouldn't have gotten national attention 2 months later, this is one of those cases that would have been swept under the rug. March 13th, we would have expected the city to ask for a federal investigation back in March. But now we're in May. We're just getting that amidst all the national media attention. So it feels like if the national media wasn't paying attention to this case, then the city of Louisville, the mayor's office, LMPD would not be paying attention to this case as well. And the second part of that is we don't just need to talk anymore. We need policy change. In this particular Breonna Taylor case, we see these 3 officers. For one suspect, these officers obtained 5 no-knock search warrants in 1 day. To date, there's only been 6 no-knock search warrants issued in the city of Louisville, period, by LMPD. One suspect was issued 5 no-knock search warrants based on 2-month-old evidence. 2-month-old evidence. One search warrant on the suspect was executed at 10 or 11 a.m. Breonna Taylor's search warrant wasn't executed till after midnight. There should be a policy against things like that so situations like this don't occur. Because what it feels like is that the police department is running around here unchecked, unsupervised, and able to operate in whatever fashion they choose to operate in. And when you operate under those circumstances, you have the opportunity for officers to become rogue.
Well, if the community feels that like the police department is unchecked and unsupervised, I mean, that is a totally unacceptable situation, right? And nobody can tell anybody else how they feel. But this whole concept of police community legitimacy to me means the police are only as legitimate as the community says they are. And that's the whole core of the Synergy Project, right? And so you can say as a police officer, police department, look, we're legitimate. If the community is saying, bro, you're not, then that gap has got to be closed. And it has to be closed with policy and structure and transparency. So you can say, look, if things happen in the future that happen, we at least know it wasn't because of some kind of systemic or policy failure. So when we go back on this, just to address the issue of what we do in the city when there's an officer involved shooting, and I don't know if other cities are doing this right now, but at the time when we put this in place, when I came into office, if there was an officer involved shooting, the department didn't say anything. You know, it was just like public integrity unit starts, and then 2-3 months later, when the case comes out, that's when people start talking about it. The amount of tension that creates in a city when there's an officer involved shooting, to me, is that we've got to address this immediately. And that's when I changed the policy. Within 24 hours, there's a press conference. There's a group of community citizens that come together to look at any evidence to say, okay, we understand what this is. It's unfortunate, but we're talking about it. And that's what happened on March 13th. And then the coronavirus took place. So that's been a weird thing on top of all these other things. And then obviously this case was linked with the Ahmaud Arbery tragedy in Brunswick, Georgia. Historically, they're in the same kind of category in terms of the incidents themselves. They are not, but that's what led to a lot of national attention on this. And I will never be able to answer the question on would this case have been handled differently if it wasn't brought into the national spotlight. I would hope, looking at myself in the mirror, I would say I wouldn't have just stood by and said, okay, let's paper this over. If there is injustice to be called out, I call it out. But we're never going to know that, right? So the only thing that we can determine going forward is how we act in the moment, how we act in the day. And the type of changes that have been taking place already, we'll continue to make changes when we see opportunities to make those throughout these cases. But at the end of the day, if the community has lack of confidence in it, whether it's a no-knock warrant policy or a body camera policy, that it will continue to result in illegitimacy in terms of a police-community relationship. And that's not going to help us. That's not what the Synergy Project is all about. And that's what we got to keep pressing on.
Thank you, Mayor Greg Fischer. Next up, we have Latasha Harrison. And I would like for everybody to please be mindful of time. We have one more round of questions, and the mayor does have to leave us at 9:30 a.m. Again, Mayor Fischer, thank you for being on. Latasha Harrison, the floor is yours.
Okay. My question and concern is that we set up programs and policies, but it seems that the programs and policies aren't working. And me being a person that is actually in the community, working and doing the work with a whole lot of other people that are here, it's like we have systems in place, but it needs to be restructured. We can't keep using the same people that are at the table. We need people that are really engaged, that are in the community. You know, I see that when the coronavirus started, we have the fund that your office started. But there are so many people that are actually out there doing the work, but cannot even receive help to actually help those that need things. Like, we can't keep using the same people and providing the same resources. We can't keep producing plans and creating policies where there's the same people at the table. You need to restructure the table. Like, what are you going to do at this point? Because it seems like the system is those who work with the people. Right now, like the mayor's office, you have people that you regularly work with. But now it has to be restructured where Hannah Drake's at the table. There's Denisha's at the table, people that are actually in the community doing things. And as far as the policy, as far as hiring the new police chief, how's the community going to be involved with that? Right now, that is very important that we have to be at the table. How are you going to restructure that system to make sure that the new person doesn't continue to make the same issues like Hannah Drake said? You're just replacing the leader, but still have the same problems.
Yeah. So the communities definitely will, I will invite the community to be involved in the whole new police chief selection. And I hope that the community will be involved in a very broad and equitable way. So, I mean, here's the way that I've gone about to try to address your question, which is a good question, is, we created here an office for equity. So we were one of the first cities in the country to do that. And I did that because the decisions we make here at Metro government are made through a lens of equity. Historically, there has not been equity in this country, right? There's been this view of equality. Everybody should get the same. Well, if you started off 400 years behind and you're just getting the equal amount, that doesn't help you today. All right. So that's the whole concept about equity. And Kelly Watson was our founding chief equity officer. So what seems to happen is once you're employed by Metro government, you become the man, right? So people that we know, Kelly Watson, Yvette Gentry, Vincent James, are people from our community that we hire them, we ask them to work with us so that they can bring their skills and talents, and then they become perceived as part of the system, as opposed to these are good people really working for change as well inside of a city that's changing its structure, for instance, in its chief equity officer and all these other programs that we've talked about. But we're not getting the results fast enough, right? We engage with the community. We insist that the Fund for the Arts have an equity lens on how their funds are distributed. The same with our COVID relief fund through an equity lens. So we either fail with communication, or we fail with results, or we fail with both. But the bottom line is we can always do more. And I don't know if we're ever going to be at a perfect place where people say, okay, you're hitting it on all strides, but that's the goal. So I wish I could tell you that, this is the perfect way it's going to happen. That's just the way we're approaching it right now. And many of you all on this call I would consider, you may not like to be considered an ally of mine, but I consider you allies, whether it's showcasing your art and asking you to have voice in the community, or being media presence here. I feel like we're part of the team, same team working towards something different, but it's a lot easier for me to say that as a older white guy that's had privilege and a different life than you all have had.
Teammate, can I do counteract real quick? Just a quick question. Mayor Fischer, can you make a commitment to actually make sure that whatever your selection committee is, as far as for the chief, that we have the proper amount of Black representation on that committee?
Absolutely. I mean, it's in the whole police community legitimacy category. If we have a search process for a new chief, that our community, in particular Black Louisville, feels like we're not represented, that would be a failure from the very beginning. So that wouldn't be smart or wise, or hopefully consistent with what I do.
And thank you, Latasha, and thank you, Mayor Greg Fischer. We also had another guest panelist that she couldn't make it this morning. Her name is Michelle Penix. And Mayor, she has a question for you. She is asking, are you willing to say no to programs that specifically targeted toward Black people will be cut in the budget as a sign of honest understanding?
So I would like, from a budget that I put to the Metro Council, absolutely. Okay. So the Metro Council's really primary function is to pass a budget. All right. So I would ask something from you all here, and that is we need more advocacy from the community to the Metro Council. We have been trying to increase the resources that we have going to our Office for Safe and Health Neighborhoods, to our Summer Works program. These are all programs that benefit our communities of color more than not, but I have not been as successful as I would like to have been. In this budget alone, we have more than $1.5 million targeted toward opportunity youth. And so those are young brothers, and usually young brothers, that have dropped out of high school, haven't gotten their degree yet, and they need help getting back to get their degree so they can get in a constructive place. And there's debate on that, on whether or not the council is going to allow that to happen. So the community has to have voice in these efforts as well. But when it comes from us, we go through our budget and we use a racial equity lens to make our decisions. Okay, then it goes to the Metro Council. So I can't tell them what to do. Obviously, I put a budget forth that represents our values, and then they pass it from there.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Fischer. We have one more round of questions, and again, please try to keep it brief, you all. We only have the order until 9:30 a.m. I believe Dr. Ricky, you are up next. Thank you.
Mayor Fischer, do you think, just overall, not just in Louisville, as we see what happened in Minnesota, what happened in Central Park recently, that we're reaching a racial tipping point in the country that's forcing us to go in a different direction?
I think, you mentioned the tipping point at the beginning, Dr. Jones, and question is, right, I mean, what happens when you get to it? Are you at a tipping point? And then what happens when you get to a tipping point? I thought in post-Ferguson, Michael Brown, I thought that was going to be a tipping point, because if we'll remember, there were multiple cities around the country that were in flames after the Ferguson incident. And I thought, I'm going to wake up one morning and there's going to be 20 cities in flames. And will that be enough to get the attention of the federal government? That's where this has got to start in terms of big outcome changes, because that's where the flow of money comes from, to say, we have got to change our country. This is not working, right? So so how do you get to a tipping point if we're not there right now in terms of awareness of America? And it's been stressed even further by the pandemic, right? I mean, that's one of the things that's made all this so much more difficult. But maybe it's fortuitous in the end that because of the pressure that this pandemic is putting on people. I mean, look, think about it. Here you are in Black America, okay? You're being disproportionately affected by the deaths of the pandemic. You're being disproportionately impacted by the loss of jobs because of frontline jobs because of the pandemic. We're seeing this kind of racial killings that are taking place in our country right now. I mean, that's a lot for anybody to handle anytime, not to mention all the stuff that came before it and that you live with 24/7. All right, so it's like, okay, how much more can we take here? So is that tipping point then going to happen voluntarily from a federal government level, state, local government level, or is it going to be happening as a reaction to America metaphorically or literally in flames, right? And then how, kind of like, then what's our responsibility in this? I read somewhere the other day, it says you can't fan the flames and condemn the fire, right? So we've got to be thinking about, okay, look, and I've said here locally on some of the folks that are using super inflammatory language, it's like, A, we know each other. B, we're going to be in this city together for years. So we can either 6 months from now saying, look, we really did this in a constructive way and there is real change taking place, or we can be in front of a block burning down in the city in 6 days and saying, okay, where do we go from here? Now, so this tipping point starts with me on things like family supporting wage, for instance. You know, we're locked into this capitalistic mindset of the survival of the fittest. And it hadn't worked out except for the top 20% in the country right now. You've got to get to a point where everybody can, make a living, feel like they can retire with dignity, have housing security, food security, education, healthcare security, all those type of things. So we have to say, where does that start? We can do what we can locally. I can tell you there's plenty of mayors that would like to do that. You can do that within the construct of what you're preempted by the state to do that. And we've talked about that before, Dr. Jones. So what can we do in our city to say we're making our best effort while we mobilize for national change? We obviously got a presidential election coming up here in November. It has a very stark contrast in terms of the outcome. 4 more years of the incumbent, or someone that's elected that's going to be more sympathetic to what we're talking on this call about. And then the question is, can you drive that kind of change? And a lot of it depends on who's in front of the U.S. Senate as well. So I don't know, Ricky. If there are not people of goodwill that are white folks out there, which is I hate to say the primary obstacle in this right now, saying, uh-oh, we need to change. And for me, the change comes from 3 different lenses. You either morally say, this ain't right, or you say, riots are bad for business. We don't need them, and or riots are not good because we can't get, not riots, but we've got to get our workforce in place and customers for our stuff, because 70% of the GDP of America is retail. So people say, we've got to fix this so people feel more connected. And then the third issue is what happens in developing countries is, the rich people start fearing for their lives and the lives of their kids because people that don't have anything come and kidnap their kids for ransom. All right. So it's one of those 3 lenses where America's got to wake up and say, this ain't right. So I don't know if we're at that tipping point, but I sure hope so. And I hope it happens proactively by people of goodwill so that we can say we faced this emergency the best way that we could.
Thank you, Mayor. Hannah Drake.
I think my final question would be, and you've said several times on this show that you are an older white male, and I understand that you understand your privilege. So I would like to ask, for your final years as the mayor of Louisville, do you have the courage to stand with Black people and impact and change policies where you have the power to do that and leave a legacy in Black Louisville that says, I stood up. And even though I was on my way out the door, I did things to make a change in Louisville. So when you leave here, what will be your legacy that you leave Black Louisville with?
Yeah.
Awesome question. Awesome.
Good question. Yeah, so the way I approach life, Anna, is not, I've got 2.5 years left and I'm just going to run out the clock. You don't do a job like that, or you shouldn't do a job like this with that. I mean, this is a job where you work 16, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if you don't, you shouldn't be the mayor, because the city citizens deserve that. So when there's an opportunity for truth and justice, I'm going to be there. I'd like to think I have been there. And I'd like to think when Black Louisville looks at what I've done in terms of being a mayor of the people and for the community, and the investments in the areas of the community and the inclusion and equity that I've driven here in the community like no mayor's ever done before, I'd like to think that's part of my legacy. And the additional part of that legacy will be, this is a guy that stood up when he needed to stand up, when the situation presented itself. So that's certainly my intention. And I will do that with, all of the kind of compassion and power of this office, and do it in a way that, see, my job is interesting in that, I've got so many different constituents, right? When you go through a crisis, you've got to keep all those constituencies together so that the city stays together as much as it possibly can. Now, within those constituents, there are going to be constituencies that are more aggrieved historically than others, right? So that means in this case, the dominant demographic, a white Louisville, needs to understand that as well. It cannot just be business as usual. Okay? Business as usual is not working here in our city. It's not working in our country. It's not working for, as I just said, it's not working for moral reasons. And even just short and long term, it's not going to work economically. There is a demographic shift happening in our country where white folks are going to be the minority in about 20 years. Okay, so if you have a brain, if you're not even just thinking from a moral standpoint on the need for change, you got to think about it from an economic lens or a security lens as well. And so that's how I try to appeal to white populations, to bring them into this conversation. That was pre-pandemic. And that was the whole kind of lean into Louisville lens that we approach these things around. So to answer your question, if I am not doing that, I feel certain that Anna Drake will hold me accountable, either in conversations that you and I have on a day, whenever we run into each other, or through your art. And I welcome that, as I have welcomed that.
Thank you, Mayor Fischer. I think we have time for one more question. And when Mayor Fischer has to leave us at 9:30 a.m. again, and I'm asking the panelists to please stay on for another 15 minutes to do a wrap up after we end with Mayor Greg Fischer. I believe Ja'Cory Arthur, you are up next, if you have a question for Mayor Fischer.
So many of the issues for Black Louisville and Black America in general are based on our economic conditions. And a study from Dr. Sandy Darity of Duke University, the leading economist in this country, says that you can't close the racial wealth gap with Black business, Black banking, or even education. He believes that only reparations is the way to close that racial wealth gap, which is something that we have been talking about for centuries and has kind of gotten reignited lately with the ADOS movement, American Descendants of Slavery, where you actually sent a video to our conference that was in Louisville. So my question to you is, as we see in this pandemic, the federal government has literally been printing money to give to people over a course of a pandemic that happened within 4 weeks, but has refused to right a wrong that has been an issue for 400 years. So do you personally and politically believe that the federal government owes Black Americans who descend from slavery reparations? Why or why not?
Wonderful.
So well, I kind of referred to that earlier. I didn't use the word reparations, but you all know this, but when you talk about opportunities for wealth creation in our country, They have not been made available to Black America, not exclusively, but almost exclusively throughout the history of America, whether it be redlining, the inability to get a mortgage, et cetera. It's undeniable, right? So are people ready to enter this discussion of our systems in our society are not working? And so then that one of the questions that comes out then, Ja'Cory, is the one that you've asked. So then the question is, okay, how do you actuate that change, right? So I'm living the world right now as an elected official of what's possible and what's practical and what can get us to an end result. And so my emphasis is on, a family supporting wage is a minimum wage here in this country. Unfettered access to education, healthcare, housing, so that those conditions are created that impact our lowest income Americans the most. I don't know if that's called reparations. I know it's called the right thing to do. And I know that this is an issue that affects many people in our country. So I am for system change that levels the playing field so people at least have the basics covered so that they can then kind of realize what the dream of this country is supposed to be. And it's hard to do that if you don't have a home. I don't have to tell you guys that, or you don't know where your next meal is coming from. And I just think that's a disgrace for, so many people want to call America the richest country on the face of the earth, the wealthiest country on the face of the earth. Well, we do have more money than anybody else. But if we don't have conditions that I just spoke about, then that's not a rich country to me. That's not a wealthy country to me. It's a country that's way out of balance and that ironically is not leveraging its full talent and skill to be even, quote, wealthier. But this time it's wealth that more people have the basics taken care of so that we can pursue our dreams. And that's what my goal has been throughout this whole time. That this is the first office I've ever had, probably be the last office I've ever had. And when I talk about compassion, it means just respect for every citizen so that their full human potential can be flourishing and doing everything you can behind that. And part of that is making sure these basics are in place. So, Ja'Cory, I don't know if that's called reparations or not, but it would be considered very significant radical system changes that allows into a more equitable America. So if people want to call it reparations, that's fine with me. I want to get something done. I want to get it done within the context of what can move this country forward.
Thank you, Mayor Greg Fischer. At this time, you all, I want to say thank you to Mayor Greg Fischer. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time. I want to also thank you for just being as transparent as you can be. But just thank you most of all for just listening to our concerns, understanding our anger, understanding our frustration, and to the best of your ability, understanding the perspective that Black America feels as it relates to our place in America. I look forward to some continued conversations with you, Mayor, and just thank you for the job that you're doing during this pandemic. Thanks, Greg.
Well, thank you, Antonio, and thanks, everybody. Look, we're a more beautiful city and a more beautiful country when everybody has the same access to opportunity. Because, like, I know a bunch of you all, and we got a lot of talented people on here. And to me, talent is equally spread, but opportunity is not. And, that's part of my job to make sure that does take place. And I just appreciate the help to do that. Okay, hold me accountable. Let's work together. Let's move forward as fast as we can as well. So it's a sad day for America that we're in the shape that we're in right now, but we are where we are. So let's move forward together the best we can. So thanks, Antonio. Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to the panel as well. I'll take care.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I would like for the panelists to stay on as we do a quick wrap up, if you all don't mind. For those who have to leave, I understand. But for those who stay for us to do a quick wrap up, I would like for you to stay for at least 15 minutes so we can wrap up in the right way. And I do apologize for those who were not able to get to a second round of questions. Renee, Unique, I apologize. Natasha, I apologize. And Brad, I apologize. But I would like to ask either of you all, what would have been your second question? And I'll start with Renee.
My second question, because I was listening to the mayor, what he had to say, he was talking about economical wealth and the homeless issues nationally and here locally. And I can say for myself, I'm actually active in the community, feeding and clothing the homeless. And what I wanted to say is, he talks about economical wealth in local areas. Okay, so where is our retail? Whereas our small Black business owners in the West End, in these low income areas, in these high crime areas that he discussed and talks about, because for many years we have the same McDonald's, we have the same KFC, we have the same Indies, we have all these businesses in the West End that are owned by individuals that do not look like us. So the same restaurants, we can't get an Arby's, we can't get a Panera Bread, we can't get a Chick-fil-A. You know, all of we have right now, because due to COVID, we have community centers that are closed, pools, parks. Now some of the parks are reopening, but a lot of things that our kids go out and do, a lot of these things are closed. So where's our skating rinks? Where's our arcades in these areas? So he talks about economical wealth. You can't have economical wealth if you don't have small Black business owners in these areas. So that's my question I would ask them. Where's our retail? Where's our Black? What is One West doing? What is Urban League? I'm just throwing them out there.
Yeah.
We drive down, I drive down Broadway every day, and I see people out there that are hungry, and people are walking up and down the street with no clothes on. So let's talk about that. That's my question.
Yes, Brad, your thoughts. And I also want to ask you about Brad. I like to pick your brain. I also want to ask you about the transparency of the mayor. How did you feel, mayor? Because we pretty much we kept it all the way real. We kept it 100 with him. How do you feel like he did under the pressure that we were giving him and the questions we were asking? How do you think he handled the conversation?
I think he went to his typical prepared speech. He went back to giving us a history lesson of African American oppression in America. We know that. We know redlining has existed. We know African Americans have been oppressed throughout history. But what we want to know now is, what are you doing right now to alleviate some of that oppression? But that didn't get answered. And when I asked him about the national attention, does he think this Breonna Taylor situation would have been handled differently? And he couldn't even answer that. But my second question would have been, what is his office doing? What is his office doing as far as trying to create a civilian review board? Because we don't have a civilian review board when it comes to police issues in the city of Louisville. We had one prior to city merger. I think that was back in 2000, but we don't have one now. And we definitely don't have one that has subpoena power. So as we all notice, when we have relations with the police department, citizens of Louisville, FOP seems to have all the power. FOP seems to have all the power, and they attempt to bully. I don't like to use the word bully, because bully is kind of saying that we're intimidated by them, which we're not. But they attempt to bully the public. They attempted to bully Jessica Green, and anytime their officers are deemed to be wrong by the community, they stand up emphatically. So we need a civilian review board that has subpoena power, that are able to call some of these officers in cases like the Breonna Taylor situation, where we're not waiting too much to find out what happened in an investigation, because there's now, like, we now have the 911 call regarding the Breonna Taylor situation has still not been released. So we're 2 months in, and we don't have the basic information as far as to what happened in that case.
Antonio, can I speak
Yes.
for just a second?
Yes, Dr.
Yeah, and because brother Brad is partially right, and give folks a little bit of history and contemporary reality on civilian review. We didn't have civilian review prior to merger. Now we actually do have a civilian review board. I'm on it, but Brad is correct in that it is a toothless civilian review board. It exists, but it was constructed in a way where it's completely ineffective. The way civilian review works in Metro Louisville right now is that the board does not look at active cases. It does not have subpoena power. It has none of that. And quite often we'll see cases 1, 2, even 3 years after they're completed. And all the civilian review board does right now is just look at whether or not the public integrity unit followed its own regulations precisely or not, if mistakes were made in the investigation, if PIU looks at if LMPD followed its regulations. I'm sorry, and that's all the Civilian Review Board right now does. Councilwoman Keisha Dort, and I might add, and Hannah knows this. I think Ja'Cory does too. That there was a big fight a few years ago not to even let me on the board. That was terrible.
remember that. Mhm.
So that's the next point. It's really important when you talk about having Black faces in place. Louisville has a very bad habit of celebrating some Black folk just because they're in places, and there's some really, quite frankly, weak ass Black folk. So you need some folk that are actually going to be committed to something in these positions rather than the vulgar opportunism and vulgar careerism that we see with some of these folk who are in these positions. So Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey is actually working on a project now with some others, but she's spearheading it to try to completely deconstruct and reconstruct civilian review in this city. And that's something to look for. And that's something to work on, because Brother Brad is absolutely right. Cities that don't have strong civilian review, I think, are in a bad position. And so I wanted to say that real quickly. And Antonio, I gotta move out, man.
Okay.
But you know, I wanted to come on here so you couldn't say that I told you no.
I know. Publicly said Ricky has never told me no. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
All right, man.
Let me ask you a question to follow up what Ricky was talking about. Hannah Drake, what should a community review board look like, and what type of power does that board need to have to be effective, in your opinion?
It needs to look like the community. And I agree with everything that Brad and Dr. Jones said, particularly when Louisville often puts Black people in position because they think it's the Black people that we know. So I'm gonna get the pastor of such and such, and I'm gonna get the whoever of such and such. And you have Black people at the table with no power. You have Black, you know, what I don't understand is, and I've said it often, to impact a community, go into the community. There are community leaders who aren't pastors of churches. There are community leaders that are right on the corner sipping a beer that can shift the entire community. And because that leader doesn't look like what white people often think they should look like, and do not speak how white people think they should speak, they will not put them on a community review board. And we recycle the same Black people in and out of positions, and I'm not calling any names, but we all know this, who become embedded into part of the system. And I know that it's difficult, and the mayor said, we call on these people and they're not really a part of the system. They are part of the system, because when you are, your employment is tied to the very people who are oppressing Black people, you're embedded with the system, period. Because the only way, you know, I have nothing to lose. The mayor can't fire me. I'm going to say whatever the fuck I want to. I'm sorry if I can't say that. I'm going to say whatever I want to say. I have the courage to stand up and say, you can't fire me. My employment is not tied to saying the right thing about the mayor's office. You feel me? So I'm going to just speak my mind. You need to have people on that board who aren't afraid, and I know those people, who are going to call the FOP to task, who are going to call the mayor to task, who are going to call Metro Council to task, and that's how you shift things. Let me say one more thing and I'm done. Ja'Cory, when you spoke truth to power about this no-knock warrant yesterday, and you called out Barbara Sexton Smith, I felt so empowered, because it's one thing to come into communities and speak a certain way, and all of a sudden it's an accent with Black people, and then when you are in a position to change things, you back down. It's no more no knocks, period. It ain't, well, we just gonna kind of, when they are on the ropes, that's when you hit them harder. And right now, Louisville is on the ropes. You don't back down, you step on their fucking neck. That's how you get things done. And that's why I ain't on a civilian review board, because that's how I'm gonna say it.
Latasha, let me ask you, did you feel like your question was answered that you asked the mayor, and do you feel that the mayor was as transparent as he could be?
No, I think he gave the same answers that he has done on all the outlets, and he didn't answer the questions. I mean, it was just a go around, and that's one of the issues that we have. Like, when are we going to actually take accountability put things in place so that we can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just not getting it from them. So we got to figure out a way ourselves to demand action and unite as people. We have to get together, people. We as a community, we have to work together to demand that they change these things.
Okay, thank you, Latasha. And actually, we're about to close. And Brad, I'm gonna let you have closing remarks if you don't mind. Okay, I'm gonna let you have closing remarks. And Renee, thank you for joining us so much. We appreciate you and all the work that you've done. Omni, I want to thank you for always being here as our production manager for Wave FM, for letting this thing flow the way it flows. But Brad, I'm gonna let you close out the floor. Okay.
All right. I want to close out by thanking you, T-Made, and thanking Wave FM for having all these great panelists on today. But I want to close with keep our foots on their neck. Hannah Drake, I agree. We have to apply the pressure. Look, this is one of those rare instances where the city of Louisville has national attention, and Benjamin Crump has actually signed on to the Breonna Taylor case. So we have leverage now. We have leverage. The spotlight is on the city. There's a federal investigation. There's a nationally renowned attorney on this case. We do not need to let up. We need to keep our foots on their neck in the name of Breonna Taylor, in the name of Kenneth Walker, and as when it comes to the disparity for African Americans in the city of Louisville. Because as we know, as in most cities, but particularly Louisville, being that it's so segregated across 9th Street, there's a white Louisville and then there's a black Louisville. They have two totally different worlds.
Yes, that's true. Jacory, are you still here? I'm sorry. Jacory? Did Jacory leave us?
Yeah, I'm still here, bro.
Okay, I do not want to miss the opportunity for you to talk about your run for council. So actually, you'll have the last word, okay? I'm sorry.
Well, I'll just be real quick. As you notice, I mentioned our economic conditions.
Yes.
Yeah. So the mayor knows what he's doing as far as speaking and, just being an orator and as somebody said earlier, giving us a history lesson. That's why when I spoke, I gave that history lesson and then ended it with, what are you doing to systematically change that history? As somebody said, he didn't really answer the question. He also didn't say yes or no about the reparations question, which we can tie everything to our economic conditions. Sister Rivers was just talking about Black businesses in our community. So many of the businesses, so much of the land isn't owned by us. And going back to that study that I mentioned, even if we do get business grants, we still need that cash payment reparations so we can support those businesses. Because how many Black businesses get shut down left and right because people in the community don't support them? We don't support them because we don't have the money to support them. So not only are we broke, we are also. So we need the policy and we need the payments. And until we have politicians in office who are willing to admit that and be full-throated about it, we're going to keep suffering with these same issues that we've been dealing with for 400 plus years.
Okay, talk about your run for council. Why should people vote for Jacory Arthur? Why are you the right candidate for this job?
JacoryArthur.com. At the very top of my list of what we need to be working on, I got money. Fixing those economic conditions is going to impact housing. It's going to impact safety. It's going to impact your health. It's going to impact everything. And we know that Louisville is really struggling right now financially, but we have a number of ideas to combat that. So my number is 230-1616. Anybody can call me, text me, hit me up. Let's have a conversation about it. But I'm ready to be in that office, not only because I look like you, but because I live like you. I'm the only West End candidate, and I'm ready to bring that seat back home.
Yes, let's bring it back home. Let's bring it back home. And voting is June 23rd, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
June 23rd, y'all. We have to get out there and we have to exercise our right to vote. It is very important that we have people and places and policies that look like us and that not only look like us, but they are for us. They are for policy for us that is designed by us. And I know my brother, Jacory Arthur, will do that. He will represent us. I know him. He is a good friend of mine. He has supported myself, my family, my children, the children we work with, the school system. He has supported all of Black Louisville. So let's get out and let's put Jacory Arthur where he needs to be at, and that is on the Metro Council. That's where he needs to be to create real change. I want to thank everybody that was on our panel. I want to thank Dr. Ricky Jones. Thank you, Renee.
Can I say one more thing before we leave?
Yeah, go ahead, Brad. Go ahead, Brad.
Listen, I want to take this moment to absolutely salute Ja'Cory Arthur. Look, we always hear stories about our young people in our community that are doing the wrong thing. I remember when this guy was graduating. I think he graduated with a double master's. But I remember when he graduated from U of L. He graduated from I think a musical program, but he was a musician and he played in the Louisville orchestra. To watch this young man become a teacher, then start his own nonprofit, now make a move for city council at 26 years old is one of the remarkable stories that we need to tell in our community. And we don't often tell these stories a lot. We often tell them of the shooter and the robber and the drug dealer, but this is a young man. Man, look, Ja'Cory, all of us are getting old now, man. So it's on you to carry the torch. So I just want to congratulate you, man, because I've watched your journey, and I'm more than proud, man.
I love y'all, every single one of you. Denisha, Brad, and Tony, I love y'all. We're going to keep pushing forward and doing this work.
Let's do that, y'all. Wave FM, y'all. Thank you, Hannah Drake. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Latasha. We especially want to thank the mayor's office. Thank you all. And we'll continue to have this conversation, okay? This conversation cannot end today. We will continue to have this important conversation because that's the only way real change happens. It's through conversation and through policy and through us not giving up our right to live as humans. We can never give up that right. We can never give up that right. Thank you for everyone who's watched us. Thank you for supporting Wave FM Online. We will see you all later. Please stay tuned later on for the Women of Wave Wednesday with The Push, with JD, and also the Presley Post with Jasmine Presley. We'll talk to you all later. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your energy, for all the comments. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being engaged. Power to the people. Wave FM, we out. Wake up.